Have you ever felt like no matter how clearly you explain yourself, people still don't get it? Like your ideas are too complex, your vision too far ahead, your way of thinking too different for others to comprehend. You try to share what you see, what you understand, what you've discovered through your own questioning and suffering, and you're met with blank stares, dismissive comments, or worse, active resistance. And in those moments, you wonder, is there something wrong with me? Am I failing to communicate properly, or is there something else going on? Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the most misunderstood philosophers in history, knew this feeling intimately. He wrote ideas that were so far ahead of his time that they wouldn't be properly understood until decades after his death. He was called mad, dangerous, nihilistic, all because people couldn't comprehend what he was actually saying. And yet, he understood something profound. Being misunderstood is not a sign that you're failing. It's often a sign that you're operating on a level that others haven't reached yet. Now, this doesn't mean that everyone who's misunderstood is a genius. Plenty of people are misunderstood because they genuinely can't communicate or because their ideas actually are nonsense. But there's a specific kind of misunderstanding that marks something different. It's when you're saying something true, something real, something that challenges the comfortable assumptions of your time, and people reject it, not because it's wrong, but because accepting it would require them to change everything they believe. That's the misunderstanding we're talking about. That's the misunderstanding that Nietzsche experienced and that he transformed into a philosophy of greatness. In the next few minutes, we're going to explore why being misunderstood might be the most reliable sign that you're actually on to something important. Why the people who change the world are almost always rejected by it first, and why your inability to fit into conventional understanding might be the exact thing that qualifies you for extraordinary contribution. So let me ask you directly. Have you been called too intense, too complicated, too much? Have people told you to be more normal, more practical, more like everyone else? Have your deepest insights been met with confusion or dismissal? Because if they have, you're about to discover that you're in very good company. The company of every thinker, creator, and visionary who dared to see beyond the limitations of their time. And that changes everything. Most people live their entire lives inside a box. Not a physical box, but a mental one, a collection of beliefs, assumptions, and values that society has handed them. What's good, what's bad, what's possible, what's realistic, what's worth pursuing, what's a waste of time. These aren't conclusions they arrived at through deep thinking. They're inherited scripts, passed down generation after generation, accepted without question because everyone else accepts them. And this box feels safe. Inside the box, you know the rules, you know how to succeed, you know what to expect. The box protects you from uncertainty, from the anxiety of having to think for yourself, from the responsibility of creating your own values. Nietzsche understood this deeply. He called it the herd mentality, the tendency of most people to think collectively, to adopt the values of the group, to seek safety in conformity. And he wasn't condemning this out of cruelty. He understood that most people need this. The herd provides stability, community, shared meaning. But here's what happens when you're someone who can't stay in the box. Maybe you started asking questions that had no good answers. Maybe you had experiences that didn't fit the narrative you were given. Maybe you simply saw contradictions that everyone else seemed comfortable ignoring. Whatever the catalyst, you started to see the walls of the box. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. You realize that the beliefs you were taught aren't universal truths. They're just one way of looking at things, often a way that serves those in power, that maintains the status quo, that keeps people docile and predictable. And this realization is isolating, because when you try to share it, when you try to point out the walls of the box to people who are still inside, they don't thank you. They get defensive. They get angry. They call you negative, cynical, arrogant. They tell you you're overthinking, that you're making things too complicated, that you should just accept things as they are, like everyone else. But you can't. Not because you're trying to be difficult, but because you've seen too much. You've glimpsed something beyond the box, and going back feels like choosing blindness. This is where misunderstanding begins. Not because you're communicating poorly, but because you're communicating something that threatens the foundation of how others see the world. Nietzsche called these people the higher types, not in a moral sense, but in terms of consciousness. Those who have broken free from collective thinking, who have dared to question everything, who have the courage to create their own values rather than accepting inherited ones. And these higher types are always misunderstood by the herd, always. Because the herd judges everything by its own standards, by its own values, by its own limited framework. And anything that doesn't fit that framework is labeled as wrong, dangerous, crazy. Nietzsche himself was the perfect example. He wrote about the death of God, and people thought he was celebrating it, that he was a nihilist who wanted to destroy morality. But what he was actually saying was far more nuanced. He was pointing out that the traditional foundations of meaning, the religious and metaphysical certainties that had guided Western civilization for centuries, were crumbling, and he was asking the most important question of the modern age. If we no longer have these traditional sources of meaning, where do we find it? How do we create values in a world without absolute truth? But people didn't hear that. They heard blasphemy. They heard destruction. They heard what their fear and conditioning told them to hear. And so they dismissed him, called him mad, ignored his work. It wasn't until decades after his death that philosophers began to understand what he was actually saying. That he wasn't destroying meaning. He was trying to save it by rebuilding it on honest foundations, rather than comforting illusions. This is the pattern. The person who sees something true before others are ready to see it will be misunderstood, rejected, often destroyed. Not because they're wrong, but because they're right in a way that's threatening. Think about this. Every major shift in human understanding was initially met with resistance. Galileo was persecuted for saying the earth revolves around the sun. Darwin was mocked for evolution. Freud was scandalized for talking about sexuality, not because their ideas were false, but because accepting them required people to give up comforting beliefs and face uncomfortable truths. And on a smaller scale, this happens every day. When you say something that challenges the conventional wisdom of your family, your workplace, your social group, you're not met with thoughtful consideration. You're met with defensiveness, with attempts to shut you down, with social pressure to conform. Because your insight, your truth, your refusal to pretend, it threatens the shared illusion that holds the group together. And the group will always protect its illusions more fiercely than it pursues truth. This is why being misunderstood is not a bug, it's a feature. If everyone immediately understood you, if your ideas were instantly accepted, it would mean you're saying something that fits perfectly within the existing framework. Something safe, something that doesn't challenge anything. Something, in other words, that isn't truly original or important. But when you're misunderstood, when people resist what you're saying, when they can't fit you into their categories, it might mean you're touching something real, something that goes beyond the comfortable boundaries of conventional thinking. Now, here's where this gets psychologically complex. When you're constantly misunderstood, you face a choice. You can either keep trying to make people understand, exhausting yourself in the process, or you can accept that misunderstanding is part of the territory and stop seeking validation from those who can't see what you see. Most people choose the first option. They keep explaining, keep justifying, keep trying to translate their vision into terms that the herd can accept. And, in doing so, they dilute it. They compromise it. They strip away the very elements that made it challenging and important. Nietzsche chose the second option. He stopped caring whether people understood him. He wrote for what he called free spirits, those rare individuals who had the courage to think independently, to question everything, to create their own path. He knew that most people wouldn't get it, and he was fine with that. He said, "I am not a man, I am dynamite." He understood that his ideas were explosive, that they would detonate in the consciousness of those ready to receive them and be incomprehensible to everyone else. This is the paradox. The moment you stop trying to be understood by everyone, you become more powerful, because you're no longer constrained by the need to fit into existing categories. You're free to speak your truth fully, without translation, without compromise. And yes, this means fewer people will understand you, but the ones who do will understand you completely. And those connections, those rare moments of true recognition, are worth more than 1,000 shallow agreements. Carl Jung, who we've discussed before, understood this too. He spoke about the process of individuation, of becoming who you truly are, and he was clear that this process necessarily involves separation from the collective. You cannot become yourself while still seeking the approval of the herd. You cannot speak your truth while still filtering it through collective expectations. At some point, you have to choose. Do you want to be understood by many, or do you want to be true to yourself? Because you rarely get both. The person who speaks an uncomfortable truth will be misunderstood. The person who challenges collective assumptions will be rejected. The person who refuses to play the game will be excluded. But that person will also be free. Free from the exhausting performance of fitting in. Free from the constant self-betrayal of hiding their real thoughts. Free to pursue what actually matters rather than what's socially acceptable. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. So what does it actually mean to embrace being misunderstood? It doesn't mean becoming bitter or cynical. It doesn't mean assuming that everyone who disagrees with you is stupid or unconscious. It doesn't mean retreating into isolation and refusing to engage. What it means is developing what Nietzsche called amor fati, love of fate. It means accepting that if you're going to think deeply, if you're going to question boldly, if you're going to create originally, misunderstanding is inevitable. And instead of resenting it, you embrace it as confirmation that you're on the right path. Think about it this way. If you're saying something truly original, by definition, most people won't have the framework to understand it immediately. If you're creating something genuinely new, it won't fit into existing categories. If you're challenging fundamental assumptions, people will defend those assumptions because their entire worldview depends on them. So their misunderstanding isn't personal, it's structural. They literally can't see what you're pointing at because they're looking through a lens that filters it out. Nietzsche talked about the revaluation of all values, the need to completely rethink what we consider good and bad, true and false, meaningful and meaningless. And he knew that anyone attempting this would be crucified by the guardians of the old values. Not because the guardians are evil, but because they're invested. Their identity, their sense of meaning, their place in the world, all of it depends on the current value system. So when you challenge that system, you're not just challenging ideas. You're challenging their entire existence, and they will fight back with everything they have. This is why great thinkers are almost always appreciated only after their death. It takes time for consciousness to catch up. It takes a new generation, one that didn't invest their identity in the old way of thinking, to look at the challenging ideas with fresh eyes and say, wait, maybe there's something here. But by then, the person who had those ideas has usually suffered tremendously, rejected by their contemporaries, struggling financially, dying alone. Nietzsche himself went mad in his final years and spent the last decade of his life in care, completely unable to witness how influential his work would eventually become. So if you're going to choose the path of thinking independently, of speaking uncomfortable truths, of creating something genuinely new, you need to make peace with this. You need to develop a source of validation that's internal rather than external. You need to know that you're right even when everyone is telling you you're wrong. Not with arrogance, but with clarity, with the deep knowing that comes from rigorous self-examination and honest confrontation with reality. Here's what Nietzsche understood that most people miss. The herd doesn't just misunderstand greatness. It needs to misunderstand it. Because greatness, real greatness, is a threat to the comfortable mediocrity that most people have settled for. When someone achieves something extraordinary, when someone thinks something profound, when someone creates something beautiful, it holds up a mirror to everyone else and shows them what they could be if they had the courage. And most people don't want to see that mirror. It's too painful. It's easier to dismiss the achiever as crazy, lucky, privileged, anything that lets them off the hook from having to examine their own choices. This is what Nietzsche called resentment, the resentment that the weak feel toward the strong, that the mediocre feel toward the exceptional, that the conformist feels toward the independent. It's not rational, it's not fair, but it's predictable. When you dare to be different, when you dare to excel, when you dare to think thoughts that others won't think, you will trigger this resentment. And it will express itself as misunderstanding. People will misinterpret your confidence as arrogance. They'll mistake your independence as coldness. They'll see your refusal to conform as disrespect, because they need to, because the alternative is admitting that they've been settling, that they've been afraid, that they've been living inauthentically, and that admission is too painful. So instead, they attack you. They misunderstand you deliberately, unconsciously, as a defense mechanism against their own inadequacy. Now, this might sound harsh, and it is, but understanding this dynamic is liberating, because once you see it, you stop taking the misunderstanding personally. You stop thinking that if you could just explain yourself better, everyone would get it. You realize that the problem isn't your communication. The problem is that you're asking people to see something that threatens their entire way of being. And they're not ready for that. Most of them never will be. And that's okay. Because you're not here to make everyone comfortable. You're here to pursue truth, to create beauty, to think deeply, to become who you're capable of becoming. And if that makes others uncomfortable, if that triggers their defenses, if that leads to misunderstanding, so be it. That's the price of greatness. Not greatness in the sense of fame or recognition. Greatness in the sense of living at your highest potential, of refusing to settle, of daring to see and speak what others won't. Nietzsche called this the will to power, not power over others, but power over yourself. The power to overcome your own limitations, to transcend your conditioning, to create yourself, rather than accepting the self that society wants to impose on you. And everyone who exercises this will to power, everyone who refuses to be what others expect, everyone who breaks free from the herd, will be misunderstood. It's not a possibility, it's a guarantee. The question is, can you bear it? Can you continue to pursue your vision even when no one else sees it? Can you keep speaking your truth even when it falls on deaf ears? Can you maintain your integrity even when conforming would be so much easier? If you can, you're on the path to greatness. If you can't, you'll eventually surrender, compromise, become one more person who had something to say but chose silence instead. So here's the brutal truth that Nietzsche forces you to confront. You have to choose. Do you want to be understood, or do you want to be great? Do you want comfort, or do you want truth? Do you want to fit in, or do you want to be yourself? And before you answer, understand what each choice entails. If you choose to be understood, you have to speak in terms people already know. You have to think thoughts that fit existing frameworks. You have to create things that confirm rather than challenge. You have to live within the boundaries that society has drawn. You'll have community, you'll have approval, you'll have security, but you'll also have a nagging sense that you betrayed something essential, that you had a deeper voice that you silenced, that you settled for a smaller life because the bigger one required too much courage. If you choose greatness, you accept misunderstanding as your companion. You accept loneliness as the price of independence. You accept that your work might only be appreciated after you're gone. You accept that the people you love might never fully understand you. But you also get something that the conformist never experiences. You get to be yourself, fully, completely. Without compromise, you get to pursue what actually matters to you rather than what you're supposed to care about. You get to create something real rather than something safe. You get to live with integrity even if you die without recognition. Nietzsche chose the second path, and he paid for it. He was poor, he was sick, he was alone, he went mad. But he also wrote some of the most influential philosophy in human history. He changed how we think about morality, about meaning, about what it is to be human. And he did it precisely because he refused to make his ideas palatable. He refused to soften them for public consumption. He refused to seek approval. He spoke the truth as he saw it, knowing that it would be misunderstood, and he did it anyway. Whiteness. Not the absence of suffering, but the willingness to suffer for something that matters. Not the guarantee of recognition, but the commitment to the work regardless of whether anyone ever appreciates it. Not the comfort of being understood, but the freedom of being authentic. And here's what most people don't realize until it's too late. The regret of not pursuing greatness is far more painful than the suffering that greatness requires. The person who plays it safe, who seeks approval, who conforms, they might avoid the pain of rejection. But they can't avoid the pain of knowing they betrayed their potential. They can't avoid the haunting question that appears in quiet moments. What could I have been if I'd had the courage? That regret is a slow poison. It doesn't kill you quickly. It just makes you wonder, for the rest of your life, what you missed by choosing safety over truth. So let me ask you the question that matters. Are you willing to be misunderstood? Are you willing to be called crazy, arrogant, difficult, too much, not enough? All the labels that people use when they encounter something that threatens their comfortable worldview. Are you willing to lose people who can't handle your growth? Are you willing to stand alone if that's what integrity requires? Because if you are, you're ready for something extraordinary. Not extraordinary in the eyes of the world, though that might come eventually, but extraordinary in the only sense that truly matters. Extraordinary in your own eyes. Living in a way that you respect. Thinking thoughts that challenge you. Creating work that's honest. Speaking truth that's uncomfortable. Becoming someone you're proud to be. And when you do this, when you fully commit to this path, something interesting happens. The misunderstanding doesn't hurt as much anymore, because you stop needing external validation. You developed an internal compass that tells you when you're on track, and that compass is more reliable than any amount of approval. You start to attract a different kind of person, not the masses who want you to confirm their beliefs, but the few who are also on this path. The free spirits that Nietzsche wrote for. The individuals who recognize authenticity because they're pursuing it themselves. And these connections, rare as they are deeper and more meaningful than anything the herd can offer. You also develop a kind of peace. Not the peace of comfort, but the peace of alignment. When your outer life matches your inner truth. When you're not constantly betraying yourself to fit in. When you're finally being who you are, there's a profound settledness that comes. And that settledness is worth every moment of misunderstanding, every experience of rejection, every period of loneliness. Nietzsche wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." Being misunderstood is part of that chaos. It's part of the creative destruction that allows something new to emerge. It's not comfortable. It's not easy. But it's necessary, so embrace it. Stop trying to make everyone understand. Stop diluting your message to make it palatable. Stop betraying your truth to avoid rejection. Speak what you see, think what you think, create what you're called to create. And let the misunderstanding be what it is, a sign that you're saying something that matters, a confirmation that you're operating beyond the boundaries of conventional thinking, a badge of honor that marks you as someone who chose authenticity over approval. If this resonated with you, if you felt the truth of it, write in the comments, "I choose truth over comfort." Let's see how many people here are ready to walk the path of the misunderstood. How many are ready to stop seeking approval and start seeking greatness? And don't forget to watch the next video. It will show you exactly how to maintain your vision when everyone around you is telling you you're wrong. How to trust yourself when the whole world doubts you. This is not just philosophy. This is survival for those of us who refuse to conform. See you there.